Hi guys, I'm Jessica, and I've been thinking a lot about the things I love in sci-fi and fantasy. The tropes, the trends, the things that make me really love a book. So today I'm going to be sharing a list of sci-fi and fantasy opinions that I agree with. And for each opinion, I'm going to give you 2 books that I have read that I can recommend, and 1 book that I'm hoping to get to soon. If you have any recommendations for any of these opinions, please share them in the comments. I would love to see them. So let's dive in, and as you're watching, let me know in the comments if you have any recommendations for any of these opinions. My first opinion is going to be that literary sci-fi is just as valid as hard sci-fi. I am someone who really loves beautiful prose, I love big ideas, I love interesting and complex characters, and literary sci-fi is a genre that I have been getting into a lot lately because I feel like it gives a different side to the science fiction coin, so to speak. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of what I mean by literary sci-fi. The first that I don't have a copy of is actually going to be The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. This, of course, is a classic, and I'm sure you know about it, so I'm not going to explain what it's about, but The Handmaid's Tale, very literary, very moving, also has a fantastic TV show, would recommend it. And then I'm going to recommend a book that I read earlier this year. It's called I Cheerfully Refuse, and it's by Leif Enger. This is a piece of climate fiction concerning a man who loses his wife and the Odyssean-style quest that he goes on in this kind of terrible dystopian future, and what he learns about being human on the way. And I thought this was a fantastic book that I don't feel like has gotten nearly the praise that I think it should. And it definitely fits into that literary sci-fi genre. In fact, when I picked up a used copy of this at the bookstore last week, it was just shelved with regular books and not in the science fiction section, but I think it definitely fits into literary sci-fi. And my other pick is also going to be a book that I read this year, and that's going to be Where the Axe is Buried by Ray Naylor. A lot of people for literary science fiction will recommend a lot of the classic dystopian novels like 1984, Brave New World, that kind of thing. And as far as I am concerned, this book is the modern answer to those questions. It's 1984 if 1984 was set in a world that relied way too heavily on AI. It's really fantastic. It will really make you think. The writing is beautiful. I was so impressed with it. It was my first book by this author, and I am very anxious to read some more. And then for a book that I want to read that is literary sci-fi, I'm going to give you Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. This is actually on my TBR for June. I haven't started it yet, but I'm hoping to get to it soon. I know it tells the story of Kurt Vonnegut's experience being a prisoner of war in Dresden during the firebombing attack during World War II. So it's got that, and it's also got aliens. So interested to see how those 2 things are going to fit together, but this is going to be my literary sci-fi book that I'm planning to read soon. My second opinion is that complicated world building does not have to be confusing. Let me explain this a little bit. I think that sometimes if you read a lot of fantasy and sci-fi, you will find books, you will come across books that have very complex world building with, indexes and maps and lists of personnel in the index. And sometimes you find yourself getting really confused and really overwhelmed because all of these things have been thrown at you at the same time. And it's hard to follow. And I love complex world building. I love to feel like I'm in a new world, but I don't want to feel like I'm confused. So I'm going to give you a couple of picks of books that I feel like do this well. So I'm going to give you a couple of recommendations of books that I feel like do their world building well. And the first one is going to be A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martine. This is the start of a duology, and it is a kind of complicated political, I would almost call it a fantasy sci-fi blend in some ways. It is set in space, but it's very much about the politics of this world. And the way that it makes it so that the world building is very accessible is that you are following the main character who has been thrust into the role of ambassador for her people, who was not prepared for this and has in some ways basically no idea what is going on. And there are some story reasons why she's so confused about this, but I thought that that was a great way to make it so that the reader is learning about it at the same time without it feeling like you're just having these huge amounts of information dumped on you right at the beginning. It's also a fantastic book. I would recommend that one. And then I'm going to actually mention, and I think this might be a controversial choice for not confusing world building, but I am going to give you Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Moore. And a lot of people do think this book is confusing, so I did not. So your mileage may vary, I think, a little bit on this one. It does do the, here's a very long list of people at the front who are in the book. You know, it's definitely, you know, not light on the situation that you were thrown into, but you were also thrown into this situation, again, following a character who did not expect to be here, and that is Gideon herself. And I felt that we were learning about these things at the same time that she is, and that she's confused, and so are all the other characters. So the places in the book where I was confused, I felt like maybe I was supposed to be. And at the end, I was absolutely entranced by the world that Tamsin Moore had built, where we are following all of these different planets where people practice different kinds of necromancy. So good. This is one of my favorite series, so I do highly recommend it, but I loved the world building in this, and I did not find it confusing. This was a difficult one to pick a TBR book for because I don't know if it's going to be confusing if I haven't read it yet. So I've chosen a book that I know has complicated world building, and that is going to be Too Like the Lightning by Ada Palmer. This is the first book in the Terra Ignota series, and I don't know, honestly, that much about it. I know that it is written in a very different, I would say, style, almost in a quasi-historical novel style, in the style of something like, you know, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which I also haven't read. But I'm really excited to try it and see if the world building in this book works for me, and if I am hopefully not confused, because I am frequently confused. But if you have any recommendations for books that have excellent world building that is not confusing, go ahead and drop those down in the comments, because I think that's something we could all use. My next opinion is that the main characters do not have to be likable to be interesting. I think that there's a real problem. I don't want to call it a problem, but sometimes I think that a character being unlikable will cause readers to dismiss a book, when it may be that there could be a redemption arc coming for that character, or it could just be that this is a fascinating case study of somebody that you are not going to like. So I think unlikable characters are something that maybe we should embrace a little bit sometimes in books. And sometimes they have a redemption arc, sometimes they don't. I'm going to give you a few examples of what I mean. I did just recently complete The Devils by Joe Abercrombie. This book has not really one main character, but a whole band of main characters, all of whom, especially at the beginning of the book, are pretty unsympathetic and unlikable characters, kind of almost feels irredeemably unlikable. But I will say that he handled this really well. Joe Abercrombie is known for his characters and writing great characters, and I really enjoyed this story, and I enjoyed every single one of those unlikable characters by the end. Then I'm going to give you a classic recommendation, something I don't do that often, and that's going to be The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I know this is just one of those cloth-bound covers. It looks like nothing, but The Picture of Dorian Gray is one of those classic, I think, you're not supposed to like this person stories that we find in speculative fiction, and it's one of my favorites, and if you've never read it, I highly recommend it. And then for my TBR book that I would like to read, I am going to choose The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie again. Joe Abercrombie's known for having these really morally gray characters, and I, at some point, according to my Goodreads review, had read some amount of this book, 30, 40%, and had liked the characters, but didn't think it was going anywhere. And now that I have read another Joe Abercrombie book, I'm ready to dive back in and try out his well-known series and see how I feel about it, and be prepared for the fact that I know all the characters are not just going to be, you know, hero types immediately. But I'm looking forward to trying this, so that's going to be what I'm reading for unlikable characters, a thing I think we should embrace. My next opinion is that fantasy does not need a medieval Europe type setting. Now, there's nothing wrong with the medieval Europe setting. I love many, many books that have those kind of settings, but I also love it very much when we are able to step outside of that and see fantasy that is based either on a different Earth culture or it's just something completely different. And I have a few great examples of this. This is something I've been very into reading lately. We first have a series of novellas. This is the Singing Hills cycle. This first one is The Empress of Salt and Fortune. They are written by Nevo, and they are just so interesting. And these are based, I believe, on Imperial China. So this is going to be something very different. They're all very short, very dreamlike, very literary, if you like that kind of thing, as I do. That one's really great. And then something that was just like blew me away with the setting, which is P.J. Lee Clark's a master of Jinn. This is set in, I would describe it as maybe like 1910 Cairo, if it were also very steampunk. It's a really unusual setting. It was so different. I loved every minute of it. And then my other recommendation, because I can't leave it out because I just finished the series, is The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri, which is an Indian-inspired fantasy that just felt so different and fresh from anything else that I've been reading lately. I would highly recommend this entire series. I thought it was so good and so different. And then as my TBR book for this, I have The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke on my TBR for this year. I recently picked this one up. I know it has a fierce female main character, and it's based on kind of several different cultures, I believe African cultures, but I'm not totally sure about that. So if that's wrong, please correct me. And I'm really excited to read this one. And then we have an opinion that I'm pretty sure is not unpopular, and that is that standalone sci-fi fantasy is underrated. And I'm going to make a whole video about this eventually because I love standalone sci-fi fantasy so much. I love not having to read 5, 6, 12 books in order to get a complete story, although I love those too. But I do find that I'm somebody who is really bad to start a series and then not continue it. So it's really great when I can read a book and that's it, I'm done. I'm going to give you 2 books that I really love. The first one is The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez. This is an amazing standalone that has one of the most unique structures that I have ever seen in a fantasy book. It's very love it or hate it, is what I would say. And I absolutely loved it, but I do know people who hated it. So your mileage may vary, but that is one of my favorites. And then my other one that I'm going to pick is going to be Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. I love that Brandon Sanderson has written some standalones. If you don't want to get into one of his series, one of his really long series, this is a book that is set within his wider universe where you don't need to know anything else. It is very much a princess bride type story where the princess is the one doing the rescuing, which I love. And I thought it was funny and cute and sweet and romantic. And I would highly recommend it, especially if you've never read any Brandon Sanderson. And then for me, I'm going to give you a book that's been on my TBR 5 times, and that is going to be Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. I really, really want to read this book, and I keep being very intimidated by it because I hear that it's a little bit confusing to start, but I really want to read it. I just know that I'm going to love it. So this is going to be my TBR book, and I am saying right here that I'm going to get to this one this year. My next opinion is that we need more weird sci-fi fantasy. Now, weird fiction is an actual genre, and you can look it up if you would like to know more about it. One of the classics of weird fiction is going to be H.P. Lovecraft. And if you've never read any Lovecraft, you will find that if you read it, that a lot of our modern fantasy and horror is very much rooted within his stories. So it's definitely something that is worth picking up as a classic. In terms of books that are newer, I'm going to give you the second book in a series. Sorry, guys, but I already recommended the first one. And the book I'm going to recommend is Harrow the Ninth. And I don't know that Tamsin Moore considers herself to be a writer of weird fiction or new weird fiction, which is what we call the new stuff. But this book is one of the strangest experiences reading that I have ever had, even having read the first book. And as I said earlier, I didn't think the first book was confusing, but this book will do you in terms of what is going on and what's happening in your mind. And it's so fascinating to me the way the author put it together. No spoilers, so I'm not going to explain any of that. You're just going to have to read the series, which again, I do recommend. But Harrow the Ninth, people always talk about it as just being so audacious in some ways in what it's trying to do. So you should definitely check it out. And then for my TBR, I'm going to put a little bit of a classic of the new weird genre on there, and that's going to be Perdido Street Station by China Miéville. I've never read a China Miéville book, and I did think about putting Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer on here because Vandermeer is another of the authors that really kind of exemplify the new weird style, but I'm not totally sure that I want to read it. I could be convinced. But Perdido Street Station, I know, is in the style of a detective story, and I do tend to like things that blend genres together in really interesting ways, so I'm looking forward to reading that one. My next opinion, and this is one that is kind of a hill that I will die on a little bit, and that is that magic systems do not need to be perfectly explained. Now, they can be. And I am talking a little bit here about the difference between hard and soft magic systems in books. I am probably someone who loves a soft magic system, and I will read a book that has a hard magic system, and sometimes I enjoy it, but sometimes I do get a little burned out on the explaining of the magic because sometimes I just want the magic to feel like magic. So I do like a soft magic system, and I read a lot of books that have soft magic systems. Examples of a softer magic system would be something like The Night Circus. I really enjoy The Night Circus and Erin Morgenstern's writing. I think it's beautiful and lyrical. And no, we do not know. We do not know how that magic works. It just does. And that's okay because it's kind of not really the point of the book. I know a lot of people like to use Lord of the Rings as an example of a soft magic system, and I would agree with that. And I'm going to give you one that I want to read that has been on my TBR again for a really long time, and that is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. Yeah, it's huge. I really want to read this. This is the second Susanna Clarke book on this list. I don't know if you can tell that I really want to get into her works. I tried to read this a long time ago when it first came out and kind of bounced off it a little bit, but I feel like now I'm in a place where I really want to read it. And I know that this has a soft magic system. I know it's about magicians. I know it's written in the style of kind of like a Charles Dickens novel, all of these things that I like. So this one I'm looking forward to reading. I'm hoping to get to it sometime this year, but we'll see. My next opinion is that slow burn sci-fi fantasy can be worth the payoff. And what do I mean by slow burn? I'm not talking about romance. I do like a slow burn romance if I'm reading a romance, but in fantasy, I mean a book that's slower. I mean a book that is gentle, that takes its time to get places, and maybe isn't the most action-packed. And my example for this that I have read is The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison, which I don't know, so I can't hold it up. I absolutely love The Goblin Emperor, and it is such a gentle story. It's the story of a boy who never thought that he would become the emperor. It's a lot about court politics, and the main character is so nice. He's just nice. And it's hard to explain how refreshing that can be sometimes after you've been reading a lot of really action-packed fantasy to just have this world that just kind of feels nice. I wouldn't describe it as cozy. I would, in fact, say that I think cozy stories are different, and we're going to talk about those in a little bit. In terms of a slower burn story, I am thinking about reading some Robin Hobb. So starting with Assassin's Apprentice. That's another book that I started and then didn't complete. But I have a lot of FOMO from seeing so many of my friends reading and loving those books. And I feel like I want to start and try them again. And I do know that it is a little bit of a slower burn, that it's a series that you're going to read a lot of books to get this complete story. And I definitely feel like that's something that I would enjoy. My next opinion is that I love a book that has extra material. And by that, I mean maps, I mean glossaries, I mean a family tree that goes back generations. I like a diagram of a ship. If they're going to be on a ship, please show me that ship. I would like to see it. I just love stuff like that in a book. And I don't have any super specific examples of that, but if you read fantasy sci-fi, you've read a lot of things that have interesting materials in the front and back of the books. I read a lot of my books from the library, and a lot of the books you see behind me are books that I have purchased after I gave them high ratings and I loved them. And one of the reasons that I will purchase a book after I've read it is because I want to own that end material. I have a lot of hardbacks because I like a map. And in terms of a TBR book, I actually was looking up books with interesting maps, and I found The Traitor Baru Cormorant by Seth Dickinson. And I haven't read anything by this author, but I was looking up books with good maps. And this one, I saw the map, and I'll put a little picture of it on the screen here from the front of the book. And the map itself is actually annotated by the main character. And it looks like it's going to be hilarious. And if that's the general tone of the book, then I feel like it's a book for me. So I immediately went and added it to my TBR. My next opinion is that mixing genres makes a book better. I know it's kind of trendy right now. I feel like it's trendy to have books that have different genres mixed into them, whether it's a science fiction book with some fantasy in it, or a fantasy mystery, or I've seen fantasy westerns, I've seen sci-fi westerns, I've seen a lot of different things. And I generally really love that because I think it gives you the opportunity to kind of not just make the book full of the tropes of one genre, but to be able to kind of make new things. And I have a couple examples. The first one will surprise no one who watches my channel, and that is The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. I absolutely love this series. This is a Holmesian kind of Holmes and Watson detective story that is set in this crazy, weird fantasy world that I'm not going to explain because I want you to explain it. I want you to see it for yourself. But this is fantastic. I know everybody's talking about it because the second book just came out, but it really is just as good as everyone is saying. And then my other one is going to be Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. This is the start of a duology. I have both the books back here. I've read them both. I actually like the second book better than the first book. And this is a fantasy combined with, I would say, a heist story. So if you like a heist and you like fantasy, I would highly recommend this. These are young adult books, but I don't think they feel young adult in any way in particular, actually. I just think the characters seem a lot younger on paper than they act. So I just kind of ignored all that part. But these are great, and I highly recommend them. And then the book that I want to read for Genre Blend next is going to be Murder at Spindle Manor. And this book won the SFF competition, I think, 2 years ago. It might have been last year. I'm not sure. And so it's independently published. I am planning to use it for my our fantasy bingo card this year. Looking forward to that. And it is a historical fantasy mystery, and I'm very into that. My next opinion is that found family is the superior trope. I have an entire video on this that you can go back and watch that I will link down below, but I absolutely love a book that has a found family in it. There's just something in a book about a group of people who are unrelated coming together, and I just love it. It's just so good. I have a lot of recommendations in that video. I'm just going to point out Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher, or actually most T. Kingfisher books, but this one in particular. This is the story of a princess who is on a journey to save her sister, who has been married to a very bad prince, and everything that happens along the way, and the people that she meets who become her own little band of family. It's so heartwarming. I absolutely love it. And then I have many books on my TBR that are full of found family, but the one that I'm going to talk about here is The Bone Ships by R.J. Barker. This is kind of a more traditional fantasy story that still contains some of those elements of found family, and I'm looking forward to getting to it soon. My next opinion is that you do not have to understand all of the science in order to enjoy a science fiction book. And I am sometimes guilty of this, of thinking that if I am not an expert in whatever science the book is going to be bringing up, that I'm not going to understand it and I'm not going to have a good time. But I know that it's not true. And my books that I would say go along with this would be, first of all, The Martian by Andy Weir. The Martian has a lot of science in it. It is very science forward. It has very math forward. None of these are things that I am particularly, they are not within my wheelhouse, shall we say, particularly not the math. But I really enjoyed it. And I'm also going to bring back Where the Axe is Buried by Ray Naylor as another book that has a lot of science in it that I don't think I completely understood, but it did inspire me to learn more about AI. And on that same vein, the book that I want to read is going to be The Mountain and the Sea, also by Ray Naylor. And I know this, again, has a lot of stuff about AI and consciousness and things like that in it. I am expecting to have to look some things up, but I'm really looking forward to it. And I want to bring myself to not be afraid of books that I feel like might be more hard science fiction, because I do feel that within myself since I'm not a scientist. Maybe I think that I'm not going to understand them, but I don't think that that's true. So I think that this is a good one for me to keep in mind for myself. And then when I was making my list, I actually have two that I think I'm just going to put together now. And those are magic realism and low fantasy deserve more love. Absolutely. And also, sometimes it's okay to prefer the vibes over plot. There are a number of books that I would consider to be pretty vibes over plot. I think that The Night Circus, which I already talked about, would be an excellent example of vibes over plot. There was a plot. People describe the book as vibes over plot. When I read it, I actually was surprised there was as much plot as there was, because I thought it was just going to be scenes at a circus, and it kind of was that too, but I really enjoyed it. I also think, something like The Cautious Traveler's Guide to the Wasteland, which I would put into that same category. It has a plot. There's stuff going on in this book, but so much of it for me, especially what I enjoyed about it, was just the vibes. This is a book about a train that travels over a mysterious wasteland that has appeared, we don't know how, in Siberia. And it's a very fancy kind of Orient Express style train that also has all of these iron bars on the windows to keep everything in the wasteland out. And I was kind of obsessed with the description of the wasteland, with the description of the train and the operation of the train. And it was just very much, it was a vibey book for me. And I don't know how to explain it more than that. I also just read The Night and the Moth by Rachel Gillig, which is a romantasy that has a plot line, but I'm going to be honest, I was there for the vibes. I liked the vibes of this book. I just thought it had such an interesting atmosphere. It's very gothic. I love gothic vibes. I was into it. And I think that's okay. I think it's okay that I'm not into it because the world building was complicated and the magic system was perfectly explained. And I think sometimes it's okay to prefer books for different reasons like that. And I don't think there's any reason to look down on books because they have vibes or because they have romance or any of those things, or, you know, to look down on a book because it's cozy. Cozy being, again, a genre that's been very big for quite a while. And I sometimes like a cozy book and sometimes don't. My favorite example of a cozy book that I'm bringing up in this last category is The Last Gifts of the Universe by Riley August, which I don't think has gotten nearly the amount of hype that I would like it to get. It's always sitting here behind my head because it was my favorite, my #1 book last year. And it's the story of a brother and a sister who are traveling the universe to explore all of these dead civilizations to try to figure out what happened to them before the same thing happens to Earth. And they're also traveling with their cat, who wears a little spacesuit. And it is so sweet and so cute, but also very deep and philosophical and cozy. But it's not hard sci-fi. It's not talking about real stuff, but it still just hit me in that certain place. I don't know. I've got a special love for books like this, I guess is what I'm saying. As much as I love my complicated world building, I also love things that make me feel something. So I do have one more, and that's going to be just because a book is popular, that doesn't make it bad. And I think we're all guilty of this a little bit sometimes, of saying, oh, but it's so popular, it's probably not very good. And that's not necessarily true. One example that I've read of a book that is popular, that is also very good, is going to be the whole Expanse series by James S.A. Corey. And I do sometimes see people being like, oh, those are popcorn books, you know, but maybe they're not the most scientific books, but they're also really entertaining and really good and really popular for a reason. So I think, you know, we need to be careful that we don't just think something is bad just because it's popular. And I probably have a lot of books like this on my TBR, but the one that I'm going to talk about right now is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, which I have not read yet. And I am hoping to read next month if I can get it in from the library because it has a ridiculous weight on it. And I'm hoping I really enjoy it. And that is the end of my list today. Please leave me a comment and let me know what you thought about these choices, or if you have any recommendations that go along with any of these specific tropes or ideas that I brought up during the video. And if you're feeling quiet, but you'd still like to leave a comment and let me know that you're here, go ahead and leave me the fire emoji. I hope that you all have a fantastic day. I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.